if Todd held a gun to your head and said, you're playing fantasy football in the KFFSC next year, well, that's going to happen because I'm going to send him the gun.
Hi, I'm Todd Farmer.
And I'm Sam Wright, and this is What Should You Ask? All right, so today we're talking about fantasy football. So, Todd, you don't do fantasy football, do you?
I have in years past. My son's in a league, at least one league, maybe two. I don't do fantasy football league. I do a pick'ems league, a suicide league.
You don't do a fantasy football league?
No, I have not. I'm getting back in it, but my son and I converse about fantasy football daily.
Got it. I don't. I can barely keep my cell phone charged, and so I just don't know that I should add something else to obsess about.
So I tell you, you're a TV watcher, right?
Yeah.
One of the funniest comedy shows.
I've watched it. You told me about it already.
League.
Yeah, it was great.
The League.
It peaked in the first few seasons.
Yeah, The League is about a bunch of middle-aged guys who don't really have anything enjoyable in their life anymore other than fantasy football. And the pranks that they go through to, sabotage the other person. And what was the name of the Sheba? They had a trophy that the person got to carry around. Oh, the funniest thing about fantasy football, I was reading the other day, there's a first place award, but there's also a last place punishment. Okay. And the best one, the last place punishment, is the Waffle House Challenge. So if you come in last in your league, you have to spend 24 hours in a Waffle House. And for every waffle that you eat, you get an hour off of your time.
That's fine. Do you think you could eat 24 waffles? I could.
No, I'd probably take some sleep medication with me.
And sleep in the booth?
Sleep in the booth for a couple hours. But there was a chronology of someone posted online about their 24 hours of Waffle House and how they were feeling after like waffles number 3, 5, and 9. And, the funny thing, this is morphed into, we're turning into a society of degenerate gamblers. There's fantasy golf, fantasy baseball.
You can bet on tennis now. You can bet on tennis. Yeah. I mean, you can bet on anything.
You can bet on anything. Like you can bet, well, really, football and some of these sports have really just blown up. Since states have started legalizing gambling, You can bet on how many free throws is a person going to have in a basketball game. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Today on What Should You Ask, our guest is Ferrell Elliott. He is the owner and commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football League. We will be talking about fantasy football and drafts. Keep listening to What Should You Ask?
I've always prided myself on being a hard worker, but thanks to the accident, I can't even get out of bed. I need help, but I don't even know where to start.
Talk to attorneys Farmer and Wright right away. The more recent the accident, the easier it is for them to investigate, defend you, and get compensation.
I've never had to get a lawyer before. Isn't the insurance company going to help?
You can't always rely on insurance companies. That's why you need Farmer and Wright. Go online to Farmer Wright, that's Wright with a W.com.
Welcome back. I'm Todd Farmer.
And I'm Sam Wright. Thanks for joining us on What Should You Ask?
All right. Today we have Ferrell Elliott. He is the owner and commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship. And that organization is over 20 years old and has a $25,000 grand prize. So first, Ferrell, tell me, how did you get to be the owner, commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football League?
Well, that's a great question, guys. I have been involved in football my entire life, ever since walking off the college campus down in Western Kentucky, Murray State. I went to graduate school at Ole Miss. And football was always I was trying to find a way to get into professional football. I could not get in as a player, so I looked at the business side from a very, very young age. And I started my career as an NFL player agent and continue to do so 38 years later. But I was introduced to fantasy football when I went to an event in Las Vegas, and that coincided with the birth of casinos here across the river in Indiana. And I said, this would be a wonderful to bring to the region, to bring to our area an event like what we have in Las Vegas, but with a lesser fee to join and more of a regionalized event. What I was not expecting, and what has been fuel for our growth over the years, was that the national players would follow me here. And so our event is 3 days at Caesars Southern Indiana at the end of August. We have 1 day in Cincinnati at the Hard Rock Casino. And we draft online throughout the month of August to right up to the start of the season.
So this will probably tell you how old I am, Pharaoh. My first fantasy football year, it was so long ago that you had to buy the magazines. Remember the magazines?
Yeah.
And we had to do the draft, and it had all the points, and that was my first fantasy football. So what you've got here, you've got one casual football fan, and you've got one football junkie. Okay.
Yeah, Todd, I think that we could describe you as intense with it, right?
Yeah.
Well, Todd, you're exactly where you ought to be. And then, Sam, we have...
there's opportunity for growth.
Well, I like money. I saw $25,000 for something, right?
We have counseling services and therapy for you to get up to speed. So we can work with you on that. But, fantasy football guys, you were obviously very involved and very passionate about it, to buy those magazines, put together your statistics, count it all up, declare your winner in your basement leagues. And a lot of our guys go back to that time. What you have now is our platform is very, very good at the internet at KFFSC.com that we utilize our playing platform and our stats provider. Very, very good at top of the line. And that's what you need for real time scoring. You used to have to go look in the magazine. Now you can turn on real time scoring, see where you are in your division, where you are within the league. Based on any play that you see on television.
So, Ferrell, let me ask you a question for some of our listeners out there. Give us the basics on what exactly is fantasy football in these fantasy football leagues. So, give us your elevator pitch.
That's where everybody is tempted to turn off the show right there, because people start talking about it. But it really, I think a good example is a friend of mine. He's the postmaster here, and I got to know him well because I'd be going in and seeing him every day. He says, I've never played fantasy football. I'm an Eagles fan. I said, well, this is good that you've never played fantasy football, because you don't have any junk in your head. You don't have any predetermined biases that are going to keep you from being successful in a major contest. You're a bright guy. You're going to show up, get the lay of the land, and you'll eventually do well. He says, well, I'm an Eagles fan. I want to root for my team. I don't want to root for fantasy players. And you can do both. I explained to him, I said, look, you go to a restaurant, you order steak and potatoes. Just because you're eating the potatoes doesn't mean the steak's not any good. It's a situation where you are involving yourself with football. And he came back 2 years later. He says, I used to watch all the Eagles games, and, I would glance at the other games. He says, now I sit in my living room. Every game has some type of importance to me. I connect with football. I enjoy it better. This is the greatest thing ever.
Here's a question that I've got, how much this has changed. When I first started, there was really only one kind of league. This is how this thing has exploded. First of all, Sam, you don't realize this, but fantasy football is so big. When you go to an NFL game now, they are running fantasy stats on the scoreboard as the NFL games are going on. It is everywhere. But now there's all these different kind of leagues. And I've got a 17-year-old who's turned into a junkie as well. And tell me about the different, like a quarterback driven league, a non-quarterback driven league. What are the basic kind of different formats?
Well, that's the first thing that a fantasy player should do in joining any league, is to dig into the rules. That'll make you understand how you should acquire players and how you should value them. Now, I don't like gimmicky rules, but again, without putting the audience to sleep, in our KFFSC, we reward 6 points for a rushing and receiving touchdown, 4 points for a passing touchdown, which means that the quarterbacks are not elevated to your top the first 2 or 3 rounds in the draft. What you're going to see in most basement leagues is all scoring is 6 points. And in that case, you're very interested in connecting with the Tom Brady that threw for 50-plus touchdowns last year, Mahomes, who runs and throws for touchdowns. Same with Josh Allen. So you're going to grab them earlier in the draft. However, what you wish for in high stakes fantasy football, which is what this is, and our buy-in for a team in our main event where we had 720 teams last year is $300. In Las Vegas at the FFPC, a league where the winning prize is $1 million, Sam, and we pay our top five finishers get a bid to play in that. Their entry fee is $2,000. So, but those are still within the scope of high stakes fantasy football.
So, Ferrell, let me ask you a question. So, if somebody wanted to get into this, but they don't have 10 hours over the weekends to obsess about it and tinker with it, Todd, what's your suggestion? Because I read rules all day, every day. They're codified in the bankruptcy code and the U.S. statute. So what can I do?
Well, our fantasy football rules will take you about 2 to 3 minutes. Okay. What you want to take from them is how that applies to the players. So if I were saying, Todd, if Todd held a gun to your head and said you're playing fantasy football in the KFFSC next year, well, that's going to happen because I'm going to send him the gun. But you have so many tools. You can come look at previous draft boards to see what the other players are doing, and you say, "Aha, I really like this player, but to get him, I'm going to have to take him earlier." This doesn't take a lot of hours.
So, okay, Sam, whenever you're ready for me to jump into the weeds, I'm ready to get into the weeds.
Let me ask one more question. So what do you have to pay to get into the KFFSC? Like, what do you pay to get 25 shot at it?
It's $300 a team. Now, and you can play one team. You can come. Our live draft starts on Friday and doesn't end until Sunday night. You can come and play around the clock.
How many rounds is your draft typically?
20. And that usually will cover just about all of the skill players in the league that you can expect to contribute in a statistical way on Sunday in a significant way. And it will also give you room to put together players that you see may not be a starter from week one, but may have great promise to be a contributor towards the end of the season. And you'll find basement leagues and people that'll play. They'll play a 16 team roster. We're going to play a 20 team roster. And so a knowledge of the depth charts of teams in the NFL is important.
Hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but so let me ask you a question. I'm just, how when you go to Churchill Downs and as you're walking in, these guys print these tip sheets, right? Do they make those for fantasy football where I could just buy the tip sheet, plug it in, and take my money?
If you were to go to Google right now and Google fantasy football cheat sheets, yes, and you would actually come across one that says, "Put in your rules, your scoring rules, and we'll generate a cheat sheet for you." But I'm going to ask you to generate your own cheat sheet by just looking at what's happening around you. For instance, the guy that's putting his cheat sheet together in Los Angeles, he's not going to make. He's not going to put into his logarithm an idea that Wan'Dale Robinson, University of Kentucky's elite receiver that went to the New York Giants, is likely to be picked at the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship higher than he would be in Las Vegas or somewhere else. So you have to play within your local regional understanding of the community that you're in. So it's when you invest that $300, we're going to get you to try to spend all weekend with us. So we're hoping that you'll invest more. But when you invest that $300 and get that precious one team, we want you to have a good idea of what's happening when you walk in the room.
I appreciate the term invest. I like it. I like that. You should be in sales.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and we come back. I got all kinds of questions about fantasy football but we'll be right back. So this is with Ferrell Elliott, owner and commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship on What Should You Ask?
I never thought I'd need Social Security disability benefits, but I've been out of work for over a year now due to my medical condition. How do Social Security disability benefits even work?
It's time to contact attorneys Farmer and Wright. They specialize in helping people just like you get the benefits they need.
But I'm not even sure what to apply for. There are Social Security disability insurance benefits and supplemental security income.
When you need to fill out your claim, talk to Farmer and Wright first. Go online to Farmer Wright, that's right with a W.com.
Welcome back. I'm Todd Farmer.
And I'm Sam Wright. Thanks for joining us on What Should You Ask? Today, Ferrell Elliott, owner and commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship, is with us, giving me an education in fantasy football and indulging Todd in his obsession.
You mentioned it's really hard to not draft your favorite player. So I was on a plane last night and I listened to about an hour and a half of Bill Simmons, who's kind of a fantasy football junkie, talking about players. So the funny thing about this is you can have a guy that's on a really bad team and may not be like a guy you'd think is one of the best, but he always gets you a bunch of points.
Got it.
So Ferrell, who's your avatar? Who's your typical fantasy football player?
They come in, our fantasy football team owners that come in and participate in the league. I'm glad you asked that. Because this takes a lot of effort to put together this event, and I'm standing up there on the stage and I'm looking out at the crowd, and we had a attorney. I look over and there's 6 guys standing together having a very animated conversation about fantasy football. There's a young attorney that from here in Louisville that works for one of the major firms, works hard and needs an outlet. There's a truck driver from the deep south. There's a guy that's a landscaper, mows yards for a living and has all his life. There's a business executive, and there's a retiree.
Do you have many women playing fantasy football?
Yes, and yes, we do. And we've had a woman be our champion back in 2010. She won the KFFSC that year. But we're bringing together people that ordinarily wouldn't have as many opportunities to associate. And our feeling in the room is every year that it's a reunion. We've got a real family. They're competitors, and but it's a real family event. And if someone's not there, people come up to me and say, "Where's this guy? Where's this person?" And we have some husband and wife teams.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't turn. No, that wouldn't turn out well.
Well, you never know. You never know. But one of them, it was so fascinating a few years ago. He made a pick, and she got up, turned her chair where it would now where her back. She would no longer face him, and her back was to
Disgust.
him. Yeah, it was just pure. It was so funny. But they have played and sat at the table and worked together. And we, as far as typical players, we have a lot of guys that play as a partnership. You guys are a business partnership. Why don't you come and be a fantasy football partnership? You can draft your teams
Spread
together.
the risk, right?
Yeah, there you go.
So do you have frequent flyers like folks who have been in your league for years and years?
Oh, yeah. We've got a number of guys. And after 20 years, I gave a little speech for our 20th year at the event this year. And I mentioned the fact that, some of the people that helped get us to where we are have played their part and gone on. And we miss them terribly. But there's a lot of people that are alive and well and here in the room, and we intend to see them every year.
How high would you draft Javonte Williams?
Oh, I would draft him. I would consider drafting him in the late first round. And if he's anywhere around in the middle of the second round and I'm pairing him with another elite player, either receiver or running back, I think I'm on my way to a championship.
All right. What about Russell Wilson?
Well, Russell Wilson, and this is, again, look at your rules. You're going to wait on quarterback. The key is, and I don't really care what the rules are, the key is to wait on quarterbacks, because the differential between the very top point scoring quarterback and your 11th and 12th point scoring quarterback is not that much. So you would be better off to put your investment in a position player other than quarterback early in the draft. And so that takes us to Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson, fantastic quarterback, 8th to 10th rated quarterback in fantasy football right now with a very high ceiling. That would be a great situation. You're talking about 2 Broncos there. What you might want to do with that team is what's known in fantasy football as the stack. Add as many Broncos as you can to your roster, especially if it's a 20-player roster, because the Broncos are likely to put some points on the board.
The only problem with doing that, Sam, if you go pick all the players on your team, you go from the mountaintop to the ditch.
Yeah, high highs and low lows.
High and low lows, depending on how the week goes.
This is the year to do it because the Broncos have invested wisely over the past few years, and all of their players are climbing the board, from wide receiver Sutton to wide receiver Judy to the tight end that I refer to as Uncle Albert because I can't readily pronounce his last name.
Okuwebanam.
Very good, Jeff. Very good.
So last year, Ferrell, my son was in fantasy football, and he was picking 2nd or 3rd overall, and he drafted Christian McCaffrey.
Sure.
And you know what happened. So, he does all of his research, drafts Christian McCaffrey, then the guy gets hurt in like week 3 and misses the rest of the season or whatever. So who's that guy out there? Who is that really great player that everybody knows about that you just wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole?
Well, McCaffrey might be that player, considering that the last 64 games played by his team, that he's been active for 22 of them. And in fantasy football, I say availability is the best ability. And
we say that in our law practice.
There you go. And when you're in a situation like that, see, when your son took McCaffrey, the player in front of him, the player behind him, is the superstar of the league as well. And so his cost benefit of drafting someone else was much in his favor to go to another player. But if you just love watching McCaffrey, and I'm sure your son didn't pay $300 to $2,000 for this entry fee, he wants to have his guys, and that element plays in high-stakes fantasy football. But I'm going to let someone else take that risk of a player that's an injury history, of a player that has got some age in him, of a player that is perhaps working with a new coach or a new quarterback, and perhaps they haven't gelled. It's important to realize that the NFL season is now 17 weeks, but most fantasy seasons are 11 to 12 weeks before the playoffs start. So you need to start quick and stay hot in fantasy football.
So who's your guy this year? Who's your guy that you got to go get if you could?
Oh, there's so many of them. And Jamar Chase is a good middle of the first round draft pick. Justin Jefferson is an elite receiver with the Minnesota Vikings, and he has made statements that he expects to have a year that would be above and beyond what most wide receivers, and he's going to max out much like Cooper Kupp did last year. A steady Eddie with a high percentage of increasing in both touchdowns and rushing attempts would be Austin Eckler with the Chargers, and everyone expects the Chargers to benefit from their new quarterback in the second year, from their young quarterback and the second year of the new coach. So you can make an argument for a lot of players. You cannot be wrong with drafting players in the first round unless you take an injury risk, and that risk is significant.
So it's really funny. The NFL, they do this big draft in the spring, and what they're really selling, is hope. Like, this is the year my team finally turns it around. So they're selling hope. So who's the hot rookie out there that you think could blow up? Dameon Pierce?
Well, Dameon Pierce now has the red carpet has been rolled out for him in Houston. You can now expect him to get 250 carries, catch a lot of balls, be given the opportunity to grow with a team that really played well at the end of last year. They didn't win many games, but with their young quarterback, Davis Mills, they brought in the old veteran receiver, Cooks. They got some talent down there. And so, yeah, that's going to be very, very good for Dameon Pierce. Breece Hall is headed to the New York Jets, and that's not the greatest landing place, but there's a wonderful talent that he provides in the league. We talked about Wan'Dale Robinson, who will move into Brian Dayball's offense, who came over from the offensive coordinator from the Bills. And anyone who watched the Buffalo Bills will remember what Cole Beasley did as a 33-year-old wide receiver who couldn't run very well last year. And now you take Wan'Dale Robinson, who's all about movement and running, and he's going to play that role in the offense. So there's a player that is a double-digit draft pick that could have a high profile. And, could go on and on. He's a young talent that comes into the league, and some of them are challenged. Some of them hit the wall. It's a longer season than they've ever played before. But the challenge is usually mental.
Okay, well, this has been really informative. Ferrell, if someone wants to get a hold of you and they wanted to join online, how would they do that?
They should go to KFFSC.com. There's a landing page there that will summarize the aspects of what we do, and they should open an account. And when they open an account, they'll be eligible to see the remaining leagues that are available. We have leagues open Saturday of this week, and we hope that they'll continue to fill through the weekend and a couple next week. It shuts down for us real soon for the year. But when you open an account, even if you don't play something, we'll know who you are, and we can communicate with you for what we'll be doing throughout the year and in 2023.
Well, listen, thank you to Ferrell Elliott, owner and commissioner of the Kentucky Fantasy Football State Championship. We'll provide the link to your website as well as other information in our show notes for folks looking to join one of your leagues. So, Ferrell, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
See you later, Ferrell.
Thanks, guys.
If you like what you've heard, make sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to where you listen to podcasts. You loved what you heard, then leave us a review where you listen and tell anybody that we're at whatshouldyouask.live, and we'll see you next Wednesday.
Every Wednesday, we ask, what should you ask about life topics? So make sure you come back to hear about what we're asking.
What Should You Ask is hosted by Todd Farmer and Sam Wright. The producer is Jennifer Caldwell. Visit whatshouldyouask.live to download additional episodes, suggest a future topic, or get a free book from the host. The information provided on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as legal advice on any subject matter. You should not act or refrain from acting based on any content mentioned without seeking legal or other professional advice in your area. The hosts, guests, and sponsors remove themselves from all liability for actions you take or fail to take based on any content in this broadcast.